Welcome to Ageless by Rescu. This podcast is devoted to exploring the science of rejuvenation, uncovering the most trusted experts, the must-have products, innovations, and technology in the field of vitality, aesthetics, new beauty, and cosmetic enhancement. Dr. Davin, I'm so excited to have you back on the show. You are my go-to dermatologist on all things skin. And the subject that we're talking about today is something that you are renowned for, which is glowing, bright, even-toned skin. We've talked a lot about acne before, but today the one that we're going to really discuss is probably the number one skin concern for Australian men and women, which is pigmentation and also melasma, which we're going to differentiate in this episode. The thing that I've heard so much about, and I'm excited for you to kind of share with me, because this is a treatment I haven't tried, is the Hollywood laser peel. I'd love to learn more about it, but let's start at the beginning. What is pigmentation?
Pigmentation, I think it's very important to understand pigment. And when we look at Australia, we live in a very multicultural society. So we look at the changes over the past 2-3 decades, and literally we covered all skin types, from skin type 1, fair skin, European skin, all the way up to skin type 6, which are basically darker skin types, and everything in between. So I think it's very important for us to know, anyone who's in the skincare industry, whether it be dermatologists or even estheticians or cosmetic physicians, to understand what pigment is, because skin of color, we're very prone towards pigmentation. So I think it's very important to understand it. Now, pigment can be divided, I guess, into something like genetic and can be acquired. So melasma is a very special form of pigmentation. Melasma is thought to be genetic, but there's a hormonal drive with it as well. And obviously with all forms of pigmentation, whether it be genetic or acquired, UV makes it worse. So sunlight, but also it's a little bit tricky because the visible light and also the invisible light, infrared.
I know, I've heard that is also one of the demons that we need to be careful of, right?
Yes, absolutely. So it's funny because today I was just talking to Michelle Wong, who's, lab muffin. She's very, very knowledgeable with sunscreens. And we know as dermatologists that in order to protect the skin from visible light, there's no sunscreen standards as yet to protect that. So, we need something called iron oxide, and that helps with protection of the visible light, but still we've got infrared to deal with. So just to summarize, melasma is super common. It's very hard to treat, but as you will find shortly, the laser, as in the Hollywood laser or the Hollywood Spectra, is probably the go-to laser. It's got the most amount of trials for it, and it's got the most efficacious rate of treating melasma.
Now, I have a question for you. So anything with Hollywood and the name of it, as I said in my intro, immediately piques my attention, because we know that a lot of things originate in, celebrity land. Anyone who, whose face is their business obviously wants to put their best face forward. But the other one that I've heard about, and there's a lot of chat online about, is the carbon facial, which is hugely popular in Asia. What is the carbon facial, and how does it differ, or is it the same as the Hollywood laser peel that we're going to be talking about today?
It's very similar. Basically, what we use is a target. So the target, the jargon word for it's chromophore. In other words, something to hit. Now, the basis behind the carbon facial or the Hollywood facial is a coat of carbon on the skin. Now, the carbon can lay on the skin, but it can also be absorbed in pores, right? So including pores and also oil glands, or sebaceous glands. So that gives the target something to hit. And when that actually hits when the target hits its mark, it causes a reaction. And the reaction is what we call like sub-damage heating. So there's a big word for it, subcellular selective photothermolysis, but how I try to actually describe it is that it causes a reaction that doesn't harm the cells, but quietens the pigment cells. And that is basically the basis behind the Hollywood Spectra, and that's the Hollywood peel or carbon facial as well.
So
So
that,
in
I
that,
mean, this is considered like the gold standard, isn't it, for even, smooth, bright skin? In your opinion, is that correct? Because that's, I mean, that's what I've read.
yep, I think it's a do with all treatment because, like I said, it can treat everything from enlarged pores, oily skin, acneiform skin, but also helps with fine lines and wrinkles as well, and pigmentation. So it's like a multifaceted treatment which addresses all those concerns.
And is it available in Australia?
Yes, it's available in Australia. We do a lot of it. So there's a side step for that, and that's called dermal toning. So that is what we use to treat melasma. So we use the same equipment, which is the Hollywood Spectra, but instead of putting carbon on there, we treat it de novo. In other words, nothing on that. But the carbon, when you want to upstep the treatment, you basically add the carbon facial. The downside of the carbon facial, there's upsides and downsides. The upside is obviously you treat more concerns in that application, including, like I said, acne. The downside is that the carbon needs to be applied for at least 15 minutes, preferably even half an hour to 60 minutes, and then the skin treated.
Right. But with the Hollywood laser peel, the Lutronic one that we're talking about, you are doing it on nude skin.
We're doing it on nude skin, yep.
Yes. And so who is it good for? I know you touched on, you said some of the things that it does, but let's go back to it. Who is it good for? And what does it treat specifically, the Lutronic Hollywood laser peel?
So who's it good for? What application? So everyone from light skin type to skin type 1, all the way up to skin type 5, right? So basically darker skin types. So when you look at the ethnicities, the Europeans, the Asians, Southeast Asians, Mediterraneans, it's safe, but it's also very good for treating concerns in that geographical demographics.
So really dark skin also suffer from melasma and pigmentation. Is the laser safe for them? Because it's so, as a consumer, even though, I guess I'm in the industry and I get to speak to a lot of experts, even I'm confused as to what laser is safe for me, which one should I use? And, it's a very rare occasion that I would go into my cosmetic physician and say, please treat me with this laser. So I'm hoping to educate my audience that they do have the confidence and say to their cosmetic physician, please treat me with this laser because I know it's safe for my skin. And I've researched it and I've heard about it. And I know that for my skin type, it's going to work.
Yep. So look, without getting too technical, the reason why it's a really good laser is because it's got a short pulse duration. So we talk about short pulse duration, we're talking about literally nanoseconds worth of time. And what it does is it produces a lot of energy in a very short time, right? It's not as short as a picosecond. That's why we call it nanosecond laser.
That's what I was going to ask you. Without, a full science lesson, how is it different from the picosecond? Because that's a term that perhaps we've heard more.
Yes. So picosecond laser, it's a very different animal. Yeah, with the pico. The pico, I find it very useful for literally smashing pigment, right? So we can use it. Think of pico as a sledgehammer, right? And you can shatter pigment, but shatter it in a way that's very exact. So the application for picos are things like birthmarks, and you're looking at really tricky pigment. And the downside about the pico, a couple of things. Number one, it bloody well hurts, so you need numbing. And number two, when you use it even on label settings, you have a recovery with that. Not so with the Spectra. So it follows a very different algorithm. The patients who do really well with the Spectra are those who want good skin rejuvenation with zero downtime and almost zero risk.
That's the thing that I was going to ask you. I've had laser before. I've had different types of laser before, and definitely there's a spectrum of downtime. So when you say zero downtime, I mean, you use it in your clinical practice, and, I want to get back to, how you use it in your clinical practice, but you've treated, I assume, hundreds, if not thousands of patients over the year.
Probably close to 10,000, yeah.
10,000, wow, okay.
Literally, I think when I look back in the last 12, 15 years, well over 10,000.
With the Lutronic Hollywood laser?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had this technology for a very long time, but obviously the lasers upgrade as time goes by. So I think this is my second or third reiteration of the laser. And
so no downtime, like really
zero downtime, right?
Wow,
So
that is amazing. But how many treatment sessions would you typically have if you're treating, an overall skin discoloration or rejuvenation program? And how many would you need if you are treating more stubborn melasma?
yep, so anywhere between 5 or 10, that's the guidelines. So when you look at this particular laser, it's got by far the most amount of data behind it when it comes to melasma. So, when you look out there for even lasers which cost upwards of 300,000-400,000, yeah, this is still the better laser in the context of melasma. It does what it does because of these unique properties. So it's not, like I said, it does not smash your pigment, but what it does is that it gradually decreases the pigment output from your melanocytes or pigment cells. Very, very different compared to Pico.
So you were talking before about short bandwidth and high bandwidth. Tell me a bit more about that science of it, because my listeners do actually love the science of it, and you are so good at breaking it down for the layperson. And I'm curious to learn. I want to learn this once and for all.
Okay. So basically, the shorter the pulse duration, right? So we've got something called picosecond lasers. They're measured in picoseconds. So most of them are around 700 picoseconds. Whilst the spectra laser, you're looking at 5 nanoseconds. So it's got a longer. So basically, you're delivering energy over a longer period of time. So it's not all about the energy, because remember, like I said, the way the lasers work are totally different. One blows up pigment that has minimal heat. So that's the photoacoustic picosecond laser. And this one with the spectra, it has the ability to put in a lot of energy in a short period of time. But in the context of low downtime treatments, for example, the Spectra Hollywood, or when you're looking at dermal toning, it works totally different. What you want in that quality for that laser is a steady state of energy delivery. So you don't want the power or fluence to fluctuate literally more than 5%. So that is where this laser comes in handy, because the delivery of this compared to other Q switches, very, very different. It's very precise in its way of delivering the energy, and then it can deliver it consistently.
So can you talk me through what a treatment would look like, would feel like? I'd love to know what it would be like.
Yeah. So I guess one of the most common conditions we always say in dermatology is PPP: pimples, pores, pigmentation. Top 3.
Yeah.
We call
Yes.
it triple
I've had them all. I can't believe it. I'm 48 and I still, you think you're done with one thing and another thing is coming, but now it seems to be the confluence of everything. You've got the pimples, you've got the melasma, you've got the pigmentations, you've got the wrinkles, you've got the dehydration. So yeah, I get the PPP. Bring it on.
So with the PPP, basically you put on the supplied carbon liquid, and that it's kind of spectacular because your whole face looks black because of the carbon. And like I said, we try to actually leave it on anywhere between half an hour to 60 minutes. The longer you leave it on, the better absorbed in the pilosebaceous glands. In other words, your oil glands. When you have carbon sitting in your oil glands, it acts as a target to hit. So the laser indirectly targets the oil glands by hitting the carbon, which is absorbed within your sebaceous glands.
So am I correct in assuming that what you're saying is, but because you're, infusing the carbon into the pores, that this is probably one of the only treatments that can legitimately say it reduces the pores?
Yep. So it's my go-to for pore sizing reduction.
Wow.
It does so in a couple of ways. Number one, because you've got pigment concentrated in the pores and the laser energy is hitting that pigment, the pigment that energy gets transferred to your sebum or sebocytes, which are your cells within the walls of the pore itself, right? So your sebaceous glands. When that happens, it really stuns the growth of the sebocytes, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing it does is because it penetrates to the deeper parts of the skin, the 1064. In other words, the longer the wavelength, the deeper it goes. So that stimulates collagen production. So suddenly you've got collagen that's supporting the pore, and then you've got a decreased output from the pore itself. And that's why, if you use it correctly, the pore minimizing effects of this laser is unparalleled.
That's amazing, because that is one of those holy grails of treatments. A lot of people say, oh, you can't really do anything with it cosmetically or topically. So it's great to know that the Lutronic Hollywood Laser actually addresses that. Can I ask you, is it so the, say, 60 minutes or 90 minutes for the carbon? And then do you need any numbing cream, or do you just go straight into the laser treatment?
You go straight into the laser treatment. It's
that lasts about what, 10 minutes?
About 15 minutes. Yep. Yeah. So we fire about anywhere between 2,500 all up to 5,000 shots, but it's very, very fast laser. So literally one shot in 1 second, you probably can do upwards of 10 shots. So it's a very quick treatment, and it's also very painless. It sounds spectacular. It sounds, because when the laser hits the pigment, it's like a loud snap. So it can be alarming for patients for the first 10, 20 seconds, because they think, oh my God, what's this loud noise?
I love the snack, crackle, pop. I love anything that feels like science is happening on my face. Like, give me something.
So literally it takes 10, 15 minutes. When I mean no downtime, there's no downtime. You come in, basically makeup off, carbon on. And the great thing with this treatment is, because the carbon is the chromophore, when the laser hits the black carbon, it disappears.
So what about when you were saying that sometimes you don't use the carbon? So tell me about that treatment. Is it so different to the one that we're talking about?
Yeah, so that treatment is usually a melasma protocol. So that's called the dermal toning protocol.
So same device, but a different protocol.
Different protocol. So with that, generally speaking, we use a lower power. So we use what we call lower fluence. Our spot size differs. Some people like using 6 mil, some people like using 8 mil. The difference with melasma is this: you can't overcook melasma. If you overcook melasma, you're done.
Well, that's happened to me before. I've had a laser treatment before that, overcooked melasma.
Overcooked, yeah.
And honestly, I paid the price for a decade.
Yep. So we see that a lot. So there are, there are lasers out there and there are lasers out there. So with melasma, remember, you've got to have a gentle treatment. It's a very, very different kettle of fish you're cooking. It's totally different. You've got to be very gentle. You've got to think about I guess the fluence, the power. You got to also figure out like we discussed, the best way to sun protect the patient. And most often with melasma, we give patients topicals as well to reduce pigment output.
Tell me, you said that you've had the Lutronic Hollywood Laser device in your practice for what, 10, 15 years, which is
reiterations of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And how has it helped you in your clinical practice? What does it work alongside with? How do you work it into, we've talked before that one of the things that you are fastidious about is doing a proper consultation and taking your patients on a journey and explaining to them that they don't get celebrity skin in one treatment or with one cosmetic enhancement program. So how does this Lutronic Hollywood Laser fit into your clinic, and what does it kind of help you do and do more of?
Yep. So I guess with any device, I guess when if you're starting off, I think this is one of the good devices that you can invest in. So when you ask me about that question, how does it fit in? I guess if you're just starting out, it's one device that can do multiple things. So we talk. So
you mean if you're a clinic that doesn't have multiple devices, it's a great all-rounder, right?
Okay. It's a great all-rounder. The reason being is that it can treat all skin types, like we mentioned, skin type 1 all the way up to skin type 5. So the only I guess patients that we don't use a lot of it on is, but we do, because that's we know how to use it. Even darker skin type, we're talking about African skin, it's super safe on that, providing
it is safe on African dark skin.
100%. So we use that laser to actually, when you look at races, they often, the patients who are really dark, they often have more than just one area of darkness. They usually have about 4 shades.
Yes, they have discoloration. A lot of my Indian friends, for example, I mean, the one thing they asked me, and I'm so excited to record this episode.
How to get more even skin color. Yeah. So part of it, a lot of it is genetic. So when patients come in, they go, look, you look at your aunties, uncles, mother, father, what do they look like? Oh yeah, they've got, and sometimes they don't realize it. And they go, take a really good look, and they take a really good look, and they realize that there's more than just one shade of pigment. So there's often 3 or 4 shades. So in that situation, we use the laser in a very low setting, low fluence, we call it, and try to blend it in. And we're pretty successful. We can decrease the shades from 4 shades lighter or darker to more even skin tone. So that's the first thing, is when you want to invest in a laser, the first thing you also understand is, can it treat a lot of skin types? If the answer is yes, you're probably more, a better business model compared to having a laser which just treats, 2 or 3 skin types.
So I'm going to ask you, I guess what I want to know is, what do your patients say, and what kind of patients are you recommending this to? Is it young people who are driven by social media trends, glass skin, dolphin skin?
I've never heard dolphin skin before, but
dolphin skin.
Next time I'm underwater, I think in 2 months' time, I'll check out a dolphin.
Well, dolphin skin is really shiny and kind of quite glassy. It's beautiful.
Okay.
But so, is it suitable for that young, already good skin, but really wants to have that beautiful, flawless polish? And then we're talking about skin that's probably had a bit more damage, DNA damage, sun damage, lifestyle damage. And you said, it takes 10, you recommend a course of 10 treatments. Is that over a year?
5 to 10, yep. 5 to 10.
That would be over a year?
Yeah, they'll be over a year. But the thing is that usually I break up the treatments in 2, 5 and 5. So 5 for the first 6 months and then 5 for the next 6 months. So to answer your question is, yes, it's a very good laser for those who are after that final, I call it icing on the cake.
Yes.
So people have got really good skin to begin with, but like in their 20s or early 30s, and literally there's hardly any pigment, but they want that glass skin. And the only thing that you can pick on is probably maybe some pores that you can shrink. But it goes far more complex than that. Laser's far more complex than that. Sometimes you can't really explain or can't really show on a photograph what luminosity is or glowing skin.
Yes.
We know glowing skin is more than just having, less pigment. We know that the bounce of light of certain areas, for example, your cheek, even, when you take a sidestep where the luminosity of skin can be improved with dermal fillers. Yeah. So that way we understand that luminosity and glowing skin goes far more than what we can capture using our cameras or video, because
I always think that even toned skin that is like, it's got that rich bitch energy, you know what I mean? You never see, a beautifully groomed woman or man with splotchy skin. And so for me, exactly what you said, it's the icing on the cake. It's that finishing touch that makes you look so polished and together. And I think eliminating open pores, like, when you use a makeup or a blurring powder or something to even out, open pores, instantly you just look so much better put together. So I'm super excited about this. And I think men would be, because open pores is one of the first things that men complain about, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. So when you ask me about those questions, yes, it can treat that. It can treat actual pathology. So actual pathology, when I mean pathology, medical conditions. So I class melasma, chloresma, masculine pregnancy, that's all medical. So you can treat patients with significant medical problems. You can treat patients cosmetically, and the other extreme is that you can treat, not that I'll ever remove my ink, but then you can treat tattoos with it as well.
You can.
Yes, it's a Q-switch laser. So it's a really good laser to treat tattoos.
Oh my God, I want one for the house. Whenever I hear about a device that I get super excited about, I think, but actually that leads me to a question. Do you need a doctor in your practice? Are you the only person who administers the treatment, or can a dermal therapist?
Dermal therapist in this. Look, I think I always tell patients and look, dermal therapists are really, really great at their job. They've got finesse, they've got patience, they've studied many years. So I think when I look at my top, nurses, there are a lot of them on the top 3. They started off as dermal therapists to begin with, and then from there they did their nursing. So I think it's a treatment where the learning curve is steep to begin with, but you will the providers will accelerate very quickly.
Can you use it, in sensitive areas? Can it work for pigmentation under the eyes? Can it work for other areas of does it have approval to be used on the body? Because pigmentation comes everywhere, right?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because one of the most common conditions, dark circles, so dark circles under the eyes, so we know a lot of that's genetically driven, and a lot of the ethnics have that. So the answer to your question is that this is probably, I pick the spectra way ahead of the Pico in the context of dark circles, because it actually decreases the pigment production. So when you look at pigmentation under your eyes, dark circles, it can be vascular, it can be pigment, it can be shadowing, it can be a mix of all three. So this one does really well to reduce the pigment at a cost-effective price as well. Because when you're using high-powered lasers, for example, pico lasers, and if you overcook that area, you may increase, basically petechiae, in other words, purpura, bruising, and that can actually make things worse. So it's very important to use a laser that has a good amount of power, but not too much, but once again, consistent power delivery.
So say I've come in for my first, second, third, fourth treatment. What happens when I go home? Is there any swelling? Is there any peeling? No. How do I know it's working?
Yeah. So the answer to that is that when you're treating things like melasma, you cannot overcook it. You've told that story as well, where you have a laser which is a little bit too harsh, and you're basically paying how many years of pigment from that?
10 years.
So yeah, 10 years. So the importance of both diagnosis but also accurate treatments. So to answer your question is that when you're using it in the spectra setting, the Hollywood spectra setting, when you're using it in the dermal toning setting, when you're reducing enlarged pores, when you're treating fine lines, when you're treating pigment, zero downtime, because it's a different concept compared to blowing pigment up. This one slows your pigment. So when you slow your pigment, we know that, for example, pigment that sits at the bottom of your skin, it takes between 21 to 28 days before that pigment goes up and then it gets exfoliated. So you don't see the results straight away. The results must take at least 3 weeks before you see.
So what about people who are having filler or biostimulators or, treatment to relax muscles? Can you also use this laser treatment in between or as an adjunct for that luminosity and skin toning and skin laxity as well?
Yep, absolutely. So I guess remember that there's two things. One is whether it can add to that treatment itself. So something like, a hyaluronic acid filler or a new biostimulatory filler, which changes the quality of skin. This adds to that as well.
So you can use it in conjunction.
You can do it in conjunction. And in fact, it's a funny question, because I was asked this a lot, I think in 2014. And when you look at the literature, we always think, what's the evidence that shows that laser does not melt fillers or degrade fillers or have an interaction? So in the end, my group and I published something in 2017 in regards to that. So bottom line, absolutely safe.
That's so good to know, because obviously I like everything. And a lot of people that listen to this show, are looking for things to supplement and complement what we're already doing. One of the things that I love about your social media platforms, and, I write and you influence me all the time. In fact, I recently went on vacation to Thailand, and you influenced me to get the Messy Aesthetic SPF 50. Yes, you said it was more expensive, but my goodness, that was a good one. So I followed your advice and I went and got some, and it was wonderful because it's tinted too. So I felt great. And funnily enough, it was the first sunny vacation I've ever had in my life where I didn't come back with pigment issues. So thank you.
Very good.
I took other precautions as well that I've learned from you. And I would love for you to share, because let's round out this conversation. Mm-hmm. What are some other things that we really need to be aware of when it comes to pigmentation? And what are some of the things that we can do topically from a lifestyle perspective, from what we eat? Because we've talked about melasma and pigmentation being triggered by more than just the sun.
Mm-hmm. So, I'll reference a couple of research papers. So the first thing, and I tell this day in, day out to my patients, sunscreen. You can't overlook sunscreen. Sunscreen, just by sunscreen alone, up to 50% of pigment can fade significantly with adequate use of sunscreen. So in my consultation is often about 20, 25, sometimes 30 minutes. The most amount of time by far I take is to understand the patient's photoprotection. And that sometimes it takes a, you're asking about when they first wake up, do they go for walks? Do they wear hats? Do they wear sunscreen? What kind of sunscreen they use? When they go for a drive, drop the kids off, how long is the drive? Do they use sunscreen? Is the car tinted? Trying to understand that person, yeah.
Isn't it funny, because we all think we're doing such a good job, but you're right, it's the sneaky amount of time. Or if you're sitting next to a window, I know during lockdown, I moved out of working in an office and sitting by a window. So yes, I noticed my chest. Definitely.
Yeah, so I call that collateral sun exposure. It's not sun-seeking behavior. It's very different. That's just collateral. And when you add, so I actually added up. And then I added up. So every day I add, so Monday to Friday, you do this. Okay, cool. You got an hour and a half, multiply that by 5. You add 2 hours over the weekends because you're going to the park, you're doing just normal stuff. So you'll be surprised because a lot of patients, their collateral damage, your collateral UV is really great, between 5 to 10 hours a week. And you got to get that out of the patient, because no matter how good your laser systems, no matter how good your prescriptions are, you're going to get nowhere if you're getting 5 to 10 hours of collateral UV. So by far half the consult is understanding their level of photoprotection.
And do you always tell your patients that it's SPF 50 or nothing?
Yeah. And the reason being is everyone under applies sunscreen. So remember, an SPF 50 is measured at 2 milligrams per centimeter squared, right? So basically it's like 5 mils head and neck, face and neck. So when you add all that up, 5 mils twice a week, twice a day, that's 10 mils a day. When you look at a bottle of sunscreen, that's 50 mils. So literally that sunscreen should be out in 5 days or less than a week. But no one uses it that way. Even if you're really good with sunscreen, it'll take you at least 2, most often 3 weeks to go through that bottle. Sometimes
I think you're right, because like for the sunscreens that we buy to take to the beach, we buy 1 liter
big tubs, yeah.
And but for the one that we use every day, which is probably, as you were saying, where we get the most sun, we're like measuring it out and like dabbing it on different parts of our face. And what about sunscreen in makeups? Is that just a waste of time?
I think so. It depends. We often say it's better than nothing at all. So I mean that's the first thing, and they often much less sun protection factor compared to standalone sunscreens. So I think if you're looking to, I guess, reduce photo damage, then certainly that could be adequate. But if you're trying to treat pigment, you got no chance.
And does the Lutronic Hollywood Laser treatment, does it make you more photosensitive? Do you have to be extra careful?
No, but what it does is, look, we always say melasma is, when you look at the etiology behind that, sun is by far the most contributing factor. So, and once again, it's not about telling patients not to go out in the sun, because that's just, especially in Queensland, it just can't be done. And it's not practical, and you got to live life. So I come up with solutions. And like I say, the consult is hard because I've got to come up with solutions for them, not just go, you've got like 5 hours of collateral damage. I've got to actually come up with something that's plausible, something which patients will adhere to, something that's cost effective as well, and something which they can form as a habit. So it's so on the question of photosensitivity and side effects, the answer is no.
Good. Okay. Well, so far there's no downtime. There's no swelling. Does it hurt?
No. So I'm very sensitive. No, honestly, it does not hurt at all. It literally, on the scale from 1 to 10, it is probably a 1 or 1.5. If someone did that to you in your sleep, you probably wouldn't wake up. So it is that painless.
I told you I want one of these devices. But you know what? Going back to that whole thing, consumers are really confused, and I'm really trying with Ageless to bring them expert advice, not influencer advice, not my mum told me advice, but expert advice. And for me, that's why I keep coming back to you, because you are such an expert and I trust you. And I know that you actually care on your social media. You're not educating the people that are coming to your Brisbane clinic. You're educating hundreds and thousands of your followers on the things that they can and should be doing. before we sign off, are there any contraindications? Is there anyone who can't have it, during pregnancy, or if you have rosacea, or if you're taking certain medication or have a certain disease?
Yep. So to answer your questions, that I think, look, in the context of pregnancy and lactation is no problem. Pregnancy, the way I look at it, it's such a benign laser. And we know that laser, the penetration of that, we're not treating over the abdomen. I'm absolutely fine with that. Yeah. The flip side, however, is that if you have hormonal drive for the pigment, you're basically, you're pushing the proverbial uphill, because, you've got that procedure to decrease the pigment, but your hormonal drive is a lot more. So I counsel my patients in that situation, they probably should be on a topical. It's more cost effective.
Yes.
And then postpartum, they can certainly start on the laser program. So that's one. We talked about pregnancy and lactation. The other thing, when you talk about medications, yes, there are some medications, for example, with arthritis, that they do treat patients with gold, for example, psoriasis. So those are very rare contraindications. There's no contraindications for stuff like Accutane now, that's been revised since 2016. So in that context, the contraindications are very, very small. Right?
What about if I'm using retinols and vitamin C's and a million other serums, which you tend to do?
It's fine. And the scientific reason behind that is the action spectrum. In other words, the spectrum that which activates a chemical reaction with phototoxicity or photosensitivity with vitamin A is usually in the UVA spectrum in 405. So it's in the UVA to visible light spectrum, the blue light spectrum. So it doesn't cross into the laser spectrum.
Can I ask you, does UV light create pigmentation and blue light?
Yes. Yes. So the answer is yes. It does for different ethnic skin types. So that's why it's funny. I had that conversation with Michelle Wong today about pigment sunscreens, because we know that in darker skin types, so Asians especially, we have a receptor there on the melanocyte, which is called an OPSN receptor, and that receptor is very sensitive to blue light. So when you look at sunscreens, they often have UVB, UVA. That's it. Yeah, all of them have UVB. Some of them have good UVA coverage, but we're missing on visible light coverage.
That's
where tinted. Yeah, that's where tinted sunscreens come in. So I think when it comes to visible light, I was just under an LED today. Yeah, so literally before this podcast, I put, because I had laser resurfacing because I got my brother's wedding to go to, and I overcooked it a bit last week. So I'm trying to recover from the laser resurfacing. Stick myself in the yellow light and red light, and then my my therapist asked me, Davin, do you want blue? And they go, no, I'm Asian, I can't have blue, because when you have blue light in ethnic skin types, the blue light stimulates pigment.
Amazing. See, all the things we don't know, and we need you on the show to tell us. Going back to some of the things that the Lutronic Hollywood Laser peel can do, would you always have it as an all-over face or a whole area treatment, or can you have spot treatment? Say, for example, you have pigmentation post-pregnancy and you still have, some pregnancy mask left, or you have, a lot of people have top lip pigmentation, or they, I know after my daughter was born, I used to have a huge blotch of pigmentation writing on my forehead.
Melasma,
we even gave it a name. It looked like the island of Molokini in Hawaii. So I called it my Molokini. So can you do it in spot treatments, or do you always recommend having a full face treatment or a full neck and neck treatment, or wherever else you're treating?
Yeah, so my nurses therapists are very good with that. So they can make that call. Often, for example, in areas like you say where it's focal, maybe your upper lip, or whether, like you say, centrofacial, they would do more passes there. So they might do 6 to 8 passes, and then other areas they might only do 2. So they know how to customize it for each patient. And especially when you're doing multiple shades, when you're looking at ethnic skin types, where your darkest skin type 5, skin type 6. They're so talented, they can actually blend it in very well. So I think it's the experience of your therapist or your nurse.
That's what I was asking, like who should do it? Is there a lot of training that goes with it? Is before you're actually able to use the device?
I think the basic science behind that, you can pick it up very quickly. But the finesse, like everything else, you've got to treat, hundreds of patients to get just that 5-10% finesse. And that's why I guess I'm very proud of my nurses and my therapists, because they put the work in, and they understand the patient's skin type, understand the laser, understand what clinical endpoints are. So to answer your question, easy to pick up, but I think that finesse probably takes years to understand.
Um, is it suitable for larger areas? So a lot of people we've talked about this before, back acne,
Yep.
will have a lot of pigmentation and scarring, or, the neck and neck area, or any other area where you've got a larger area to treat. Is it suitable for large areas, or would you have to do it in sections?
We often, so for I guess a large area like the back, we often give the patient 30 minutes, 35 minutes.
Yeah.
Because,
so it's just a matter of booking in
just
for
a matter of time. Yeah.
But it's not uncomfortable, as you were
No,
saying, so you
no.
can withstand it.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm going to ask one other cheeky question, if I may, because I get a lot of emails about this. What about intimate areas?
Intimate areas. If you want to decrease, I guess, the pigmentation, that's a good one. So I think
is it okay? I mean, has it been approved for treatment of intimate areas, this particular laser?
So the answer to your question is that there's no specific FDA or TGA approval for that. Yeah. So it's got approval for things, for example, like melasma. But when it makes sense. We don't do much of the intimate area treatments, but it makes sense because those areas are very prone to occlusion, right? So when you're using creams, they're very sensitive areas. So when you're trying to decrease pigment in those areas, when you try to use your topicals, you can often have a paradoxical effect, because the topicals cause irritation causes post-inflammatory pigmentation. So the answer to your question is that I think it's certainly safe in those areas. I don't know the data to represent how effective it is.
Yeah, it's just a question that I have because I get asked that
all
the time.
fair
I
question.
get asked for it on creams, on facials, on treatments. I'm on the podcast or in the magazine I'm talking about, and the first thing that someone says is, "Can I use it in intimate areas?" And I said, "Okay, I'll ask the doctor. I'll find out."
It makes sense, but I think if the biggest hint I could give you guys, creams go really, really slowly. So what you think the concentration is, you halve it or you quarter it, and then gradually work from there, because we see so many burns secondary to creams.
Do you know what? I cannot thank you enough. I really needed a laser education. I'm super excited to put my hand up and say, I want to try this laser, because I've actually backed off from laser. I'm quite nervous about it since I had that, procedure a few years ago. But I'm super curious to try it because, as you said, it is the finishing touch. So for someone like me who's, an enthusiast, let's say, I'm always looking for something new. But can teenagers have this treatment?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, when my daughter's a little bit older, I might take her to love it. She's always asking what she can do for her skin as well.
I hope it's not for tattoo removal for your daughter, though.
Not yet, no.
Not yet.
Not yet, no. It was so good to speak to you. I love speaking to you. I will have all the links to your clinic at the end of this podcast, and any questions that anyone has about the Lutronic Hollywood Laser, they can also email us. But yeah, this was a good one. I love learning more about technology. So this was one of my favorites. Thank you.
Good to talk to you. Okay. Bye for now, guys.
Bye.